Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm GOVT and these are the headlines. Pakistan Army Chief General Bajwa says his country will continue to support the Afghan peace process. Visiting Corps headquarters in Peshawar, General Bajwa said peace in Afghanistan means peace in Pakistan. He was also given a detailed briefing on the security situation in the area and fencing along the border with Afghanistan. In the Netherlands, Prime Minister Mark Rutte has handed his government's resignation to the King. This comes after it emerged that thousands of families were wrongly accused of child welfare fraud and told to pay it back. In Indonesia, the death toll from a 6.2 magnitude earthquake that rocked central Sulawesi island has risen to 42. The local disaster mitigation agency says hundreds of others have been injured. The U.S. Geological Survey says the epicenter was in West Sulawesi province at a depth of 18 kilometers. In India, the 9th round of talks between farmers and the government has ended without making any breakthrough. This was their first meeting after the top court halted the implementation of the contentious farm laws and set up a committee to resolve the issue. Since November, tens of thousands of farmers have been camping at Delhi borders against the laws they say favor big corporates. Pakistan has decided to open educational institutions across the country in phases on January the 18th. The country has reported another 2,400 cases of COVID-19 and 45 deaths overnight, raising the tally to 10,863. Meanwhile, China has put 22 million people around Beijing under lockdown after detecting 144 new infections. The global number of virus cases has crossed 93 million with nearly 2 million deaths. Pakistan has announced a 20-member squad, including 9 uncapped players for 2 test series against South Africa, starting on January the 26th in Karachi. Babar Azam will lead the Pakistani side. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Army Chief General Bajwa says his country will continue to support the Afghan peace process. Visiting Corps headquarters in Peshawar, General Bajwa says peace in Afghanistan means peace in Pakistan. The Army Chief was given a detailed briefing on the security situation in the area and the fencing along the border with Afghanistan. He appreciated the efforts of law enforcement agencies for bringing stability to erstwhile tribal districts. Acknowledging the sacrifices of the locals in the war on terror, the Army Chief said the ongoing consolidation efforts shall take the hard-earned gains towards enduring peace and stability. Meanwhile, the Afghan government says 36 Taliban fighters were killed by the Afghan National Army in Kandahar province. In a tweet, the Ministry of Defense said 12 others were wounded in Zerai, Panjwai and Arghandab districts. Meanwhile, Kabul says 14 fighters were killed and 2 others wounded during a preemptive operation in Uruzgan province. It says they were planning to attack positions of the Afghan National Army. Earlier, the government said it has killed 4 members of the group in northern Balkh province. The fighters have not responded to the Kabul's claims yet. In India, the 9th round of talks between farmers and the government has ended without making any breakthrough. But the 2 sides agree to meet again next week. This was their first meeting after the top court halted the implementation of the contentious farm laws and set up a committee to resolve the issue. Since November, Tens of thousands of farmers have been camping at Delhi borders, demanding the government roll back the laws they say favor big corporates. Nearly 80 farmers have died during the protests. The increased pressure on the government, the farmer unions have decided to intensify their stir with a rally on the Republic Day of India. In Indonesia, the death toll from a 6.2 magnitude earthquake that rocked central Sulawesi Island has risen to 42. The local disaster mitigation agency says hundreds of others have been injured. The U.S. Geological Survey says the epicenter was in West Sulawesi province at a depth of 18 kilometers, while local officials say the quake leveled a hospital and severely damaged other buildings. They said nearly 15,000 people have been displaced. A search and rescue operation is underway. In the Netherlands, Prime Minister Mark Rutte has handed his government's resignation to the king. This comes after it emerged that thousands of families were wrongly accused of child welfare fraud and told to pay it back. Many of those affected were from an immigrant background and hundreds were plunged into financial difficulties. Rutte said the responsibility for what had gone wrong lays with the cabinet. The government, however, will remain in office in a caretaker mode until a new coalition is formed. China has slammed the latest sanctions imposed by the United States on 9 of its companies. In a briefing, a foreign ministry spokesman said the U.S. has generalized the concept of national security. Zhao Lijian added Washington is suppressing Chinese companies for no reasons. He said Beijing will take necessary measures to safeguard the interests of the Chinese enterprises. On Thursday, the U.S. blacklisted Chinese companies with alleged ties to its military, including a plane maker and a smartphone manufacturer. Russia's foreign ministry says Moscow will begin the procedure to withdraw from the Open Skies Treaty. The international pact allows the unarmed surveillance flights over member countries. In a statement, the ministry said the U.S. withdrawal from the treaty last year upended the balance of interests of member states. It added that Moscow's proposals to keep the treaty alive have been cold-shouldered by Washington's allies. In November, the U.S. left the treaty and accused Russia of violating it, a charge Moscow denies. North Korea has displayed a new type of submarine-launched ballistic missile at a parade in Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square. State media said the missiles were the world's most powerful weapon and show the might of the armed forces. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the parade, held days from the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. The launch also follows a rare political meeting where Kim decried the U.S. as his country's biggest enemy. He pledged to boost the country's military might despite multiple sanctions. The U.S. has rejected a plea by the United Nations to reverse its decision of designating Yemen's Houthis as a terrorist group. U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the UN, Richard Mills, told the Security Council the move is a step in the right direction. He said the designation will advance Yemen's political process. Mills said the U.S. will consider humanitarian consequences of the designation and will take steps to reduce the impact on aid deliveries and commercial imports. The designation comes into effect on the 19th of January, the last full day of President Donald Trump's administration. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has unveiled a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan for the coronavirus-hit economy. If passed by the Congress, the package will include $1 trillion for households with direct payments of $1,400 to all Americans. The relief proposal includes $415 billion to fight the virus and $440 billion for small businesses. Supplemental unemployment insurance will also increase to $400 a week and will be extended to September. Biden was mindful of the financial burden on an economy already under trillions of debt, but said the plan was unavoidable.
I know what I just described does not come cheaply, but failure to do so will cost us dearly. The consensus among leading economists is we simply cannot afford not to do what I'm proposing.
And the U.S. security measures have been further boosted around the Capitol ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. More fences have been set up and avenues in the vicinity are fully blocked off. Over 20,000 National Guard troops will also be deployed on the inauguration day amid threats of attacks from pro-Trump supporters. The city is also placed under an emergency until January 24. Meanwhile, following the riots, Congress has called on the Pentagon to police troops for white extremism. It has also demanded a probe to determine the extent to which white supremacist ideology has infected the military's ranks. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 56 people have been killed in a suspected militant attack on a village in Irumu territory. Ituri Interior Minister Adigi Ogidi says security forces have been dispatched to probe the incident. He claimed the Uganda-based Allied Democratic Forces were responsible for the attack. Meanwhile, an army spokesperson said troops were recovering bodies after the latest violence. Earlier over the weekend, unidentified attackers killed at least 6 rangers in an ambush in eastern Virunga National Park. Congo's eastern borderlands with Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi are home to over 100 different militias, remnants of brutal civil wars. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 93 million with nearly 2 million deaths. The disease continues to devastate Britain, claiming more than 1,200 lives overnight and pushing the death toll over 86,000 with a caseload of more than 3.2 million. China has put 22 million people around Beijing under lockdown after another 144 new cases were detected on the mainland. More in this report.
As COVID-19 continues to tear across the world without any signs of slowing down, officials warn there is a full resurgence in most parts. A Chinese study has estimated that the global death toll can hit 5 million by March. Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says another 92,000 projected to die over the next 3 weeks in the U.S. alone. Research shows that the pandemic will reduce the life expectancy for blacks and Latinos by 3 to 4 times more than whites. Over in the south, hospitals in the Brazilian city of Manaus have reached a breaking point amid reports of severe oxygen shortages and desperate staff.
Manaus did not have an effective action plan for early treatment, with clinical diagnosis, basic care, and that has greatly impacted on the severity of the virus. Also, the specialist care hospital infrastructure in Manaus is quite small in percentage terms.
In Europe, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has received his first dose of vaccine as the country vaccinated more than 285,000 people on the first day of inoculations. Sweden, with a global spotlight over its unorthodox pandemic strategy, has reported a record number of daily deaths. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has urged for a very fast action to counter the spread of COVID-19 mutations, while a study shows that people infected with COVID-19 are likely to be protected against the disease for at least 5 months.
We can be quite confident that in 5 to 6 months after their first infection, the vast majority of people with the previous infection are protected from severe disease, are protected from symptomatic infection, and that there is a small proportion of people who do get asymptomatic disease and symptomatic infection.
Cases are also rising in Arab countries as Iraq, Palestine, Kuwait and Qatar announced more infections and fatalities, while Australia has recorded the second straight day of 0 cases, helped by tougher restrictions on public movement and internal borders.
In Pakistan, 45 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This takes the country's death toll to 10,863. Health officials reported 2,417 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, there are more than 34,000 active COVID-19 cases across the country. The Health Ministry says out of over 514,000 countrywide cases, more than 469,000 people have recovered. Meanwhile, the federal government has decided to delay the reopening of primary schools by 2 more weeks. But Education Minister Shafkat Mahmood says students of grades 9 through 12 will start on-campus classes from January 18. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Greece, the parliament has approved the purchase of 18 RAFALE jets from France for over $3 billion. The deal is due to be signed by the Greek and the French defense ministers later this month. Athens says the agreement is for 6 new and 12 used RAFALE jets. It says the first deliveries are expected to arrive in Greece during the first half of the year. Meanwhile, the parliament is also expected to vote next week on a bill to extend Greece's territorial waters in the Ionian Sea. Athens plans to beef up its military capacity amid a dispute with neighboring Turkey over energy resources in the Mediterranean. In Indonesia, investigators have successfully recovered data from a flight recorder of the jet that slammed into the Java Sea on Saturday, killing all 62 people on board. Committee head Surjanto says that the data is now being investigated. The National Transportation Safety Committee says the recorder has 330 parameters and all are in good condition. The recorder holds information about the speed, altitude and the direction of the plane while it crashed. A rescue party has worked for days to salvage human remains and wreckage from the Sriwijaya Air Boeing 737. More than 3,000 people are taking part in the recovery effort, assisted by dozens of boats and helicopters. A painting of the comic book hero Tintin has been sold at a Paris auction for $3.86 million. The Art Curial auction house says the artwork was kept folded in a drawer for years. The painting is the work of Belgian illustrator Georges Rachmi, better known by his nom de plume heritage. He was the author of the Tintin comic books and died in 1983. The buyer was a private collector whom the auction house did not identify. The price exceeded the top end of the estimate set by the auctioneers of $3.4 million. The painting in ink, watercolor and gouache still bears the marks where it was folded. In Australia, a racing pigeon made an extraordinary trip of nearly 13,000 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean to find a new home. But Australian authorities are considering putting down the bird over a biosecurity risk to poultry and wildlife. Nevertheless, a trip back to the US is also on the cards. Let's take a look at this report.
Melbourne resident Kevin Selly Bird found a pigeon in his garden on Boxing Day. He discovered by the tag on its leg that the bird was registered with an owner in the U.S. state of Alabama.
I came out, I managed to pick it up, got the details and rang up a local pigeon club. And they came back with, doesn't show up as anything we've got. So I Googled it and it showed up that it's American Racing Pigeon Union, and it's registered to someone in Montgomery, Alabama.
It was not clear how the bird last spotted in a pigeon race in the state of Oregon on October 29th managed to make more than 13,000-kilometer journey across the Pacific Ocean. Authorities say an investigation has begun to find the authenticity of the U.S. tag, as it was unlikely the bird flew to Australia without hitchhiking on a cargo vessel.
I'd say it's had a pretty big, strong wind, blown it off course out to sea. It's got onto a ship and has eventually found its way here in Australia.
They are also looking at options to manage the biosecurity risks, and this may include moving the bird back to the United States. The pigeon, named Joe after President-elect Joe Biden, has gained popularity on social media. Many are tweeting with the hashtag Joe the Pigeon, demanding its safe return to the United States. Australia has strict quarantine regulations to bring live animals or birds into the country to prevent diseases from spreading on the arid continent.
But if Joe has come in a way that has not met our strict biosecurity measures, then bad luck, Joe. Either fly home or face the consequences.
In 2015, Hollywood star Johnny Depp and his then-wife Amber Heard were also charged with illegally bringing their Yorkshire Terriers Pistol and Boo into Australia.
Magicians from around the globe will celebrate the centenary of sewing people in half on January the 17th. Illusionists will get together online to revel in the success of the landmark technique. More in this report.
100 years ago, illusionist P.T. Selbit created a magical classic when he put a woman in a box on the stage of London's Finsbury Park Empire and sawed right through the wood. Since then, the groundbreaking trick has never stopped amusing the audience. This year, the magician community is celebrating the longevity of the technique.
I want to show you this. That is a model of P.T. Selbit's sawing a lady in half, made out of toothpicks. And it is absolutely a perfect replica of the Selbit sawing.
Down the years, magicians have developed refinements with the two halves pulled apart. Celebrity magician David Copperfield came up with his version called the Death Saw, where he was the one tied down to a platform as a giant rotary blade sliced him in two. In an interview, Copperfield says sometimes he got injured during the trick.
Totally. I got cut a few times by the blade because the blade was a little bit off. You know, stages are different. Every theater you have different stages. So sometimes the box didn't go back together because the stage floor wasn't even and it wouldn't go back together. And so I kind of come out a little disconnected. But the saw actually is pretty dangerous. I mean, it's a real saw. And if it's off just by an inch, it's going to get me.
The London-based Magic Circle organization will host the celebrations with a live-streamed event on Facebook this Sunday. Guests will include Debbie McKee, the wife of the late British TV magician Paul Daniels. She will describe the many times she survived the procedure.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Wall Street stocks have opened lower as incoming President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus plan sparked fears of an increase in taxes. Investors also analyzed quarterly reports from the major U.S. lenders. Decline in the shares of JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs led the Dow Jones Industrial Average to trade lower. Energy, financials and materials were the worst performing sectors in the S&P 500, while Nasdaq Composite traded marginally higher. Meanwhile, oil prices have descended over China's COVID-19 lockdowns and U.S. unemployment data. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.